What's in a name? This is one of the most famous questions posed by iconic English playwright William Shakespeare. For a continent that has diverse cultures, languages, and history, Africa is undeniably a hotbed of unique naming conventions. Our names are an incredibly important part of our identity. They carry deep personal, cultural, familial, and historical connections. They also give us a sense of who we are and our place in the world. Beyond how we name ourselves, a lot can be said about how we name places, objects, and seasons. So tonight we interrogate names and naming practices here in Africa. And the big question that I'm asking tonight is, what's in a name according to you?
My name is Yafesi Musoke, and in a name, I guess there's personality, there's identity, and also ambition in some cases.
I say what a name is not. A name is not a group of letters of the alphabet that describes or identifies an object or an individual. It's much, much more than that.
Well, those are my guests tonight. We have Yafesi Musoke, a writer, stand-up comedian, and a social commentator. We also have Onyikwa Onyakundi, a namist, a writer, and a cultural observer. With a panel like that, it's bound to be exciting. Let's get connected. Well, hello there and welcome to Kenya Connects from the BBC and KTN News, connecting Kenya to the world and the world to Kenya. My name is Sharon Mashira. Now, in line with the theme of today's show, I also set out to find out what my name means. So I called my dad, Mr. Mashira, and he said that Mashira, our surname, comes from the word Shira, which in my language, Kikuyu, means a case, like a court case. So Mashira is plural for many cases. That's fascinating, right? But let's just say he wasn't very clear about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing to be named after cases, which brings us to our first story this evening. Now, beyond how we name ourselves, there's a lot of thinking that goes into naming places, and there's a name for it. It's called toponymy. And I'm sure you've all seen signboards displaying street names in all major cities and across the world. Well, those street names often appear to be insignificant and only present to guide lost travelers. There's always a story behind them, and some quite controversial, as the BBC's Francis Ontomwa found out. Take a look.
Dennis Pritt Road in Nairobi, not named after a Kenyan, but an Englishman. Dennis Pritt was a lawyer during British colonial rule.
I have no idea who Dennis Pritt is. I only read this. I don't know who this person is.
I know where the road is, but I don't know Dennis Pritt, and I don't really care.
To help find your way through this bustling city, street names come in handy. But what do they stand for? How did they get their names? And how easy is it for those names to be changed?
I'm here at Kenyatta Avenue, one of the principal streets here in the capital city of Nairobi. This street has been renamed twice. First as 6th Street, then Delamere Street, and now Kenyatta Avenue.
Naming a street after the first president of this country, Jomo Kenyatta, seems an obvious choice. But it got me thinking, how do we go about naming our streets? I am on a mission to find out. Recently, a road sign in one of Nairobi's upmarket neighborhoods was burnt down by protesters. It was named after a veteran trade unionist, Francis Atwoli. The sign has been replaced, angering further the locals, who argue that they should have been consulted.
There is a policy that governs how streets are named in this country that was written by county governments and the national government. And one of the things it says is that streets should not be named after people who are living. To the best of my knowledge, Francis Atwoli is still living, so that was a direct contravention of that policy. And then when Kenyans complained about this, both the government and Atwoli himself were quite belligerent about insisting on the naming.
Before Kenya became independent, many of the streets in Nairobi's central business district were named after the British colonial masters. As Africans started renouncing colonial rule, those streets were then renamed after prominent politicians. But that wasn't always welcomed either.
Before the name is installed, it should be put on public notice, so it can be advertised in the papers and people given a 14 to 21 day period where if there are any objections, then they should revert back to the city county government. If there is no issue, then the government can go ahead and install the name.
In most African countries, street renaming has been an important part of the process of decolonization. In South Africa, for instance, proposals to rename streets have been plenty. So here in Nairobi, what will Kenyans call their streets if they could choose?
If I were to rename this road which I'm in right now, I will call it Sauti Sol, who are a Kenyan group who represent Africa, and they do it so well. I like their music.
I would change the name to Francis Atwoli, the trade unionist, or David Maraga, our former Chief Justice.
All right, Yefesi, what are your thoughts on this whole Francis Atwoli Road saga?
Well, first of all, I didn't even know that that part of the ordinances include that you're not supposed to name a road after someone who is still alive, which kind of also means I can't get that road named after me. There was one I'd seen that would look really nice on me, but it also brings into question like roads like Jakaya Kikwete Road and a few others. There are some like that. So how do guys go about naming these roads? Is it just something that is like, okay, we would have given you a nice parcel of land, but instead, here's a nice road. Why don't we just name it after you?
Right.
Yeah.
Onyekwa, why do you think there's so much outcry about this particular road?
Well, in my opinion, I don't think that it should really matter whether the person is alive or not. But what is most important is that these roads tell a story. They're not just names. When you name a road after a particular individual, it means that that person is deserving of that honor because it's considered to be a great honor.
The guy in the story really talked about, why is it that we just name, even institutions and streets after things that touch on politics or politicians? Could we perhaps imagine naming these streets after musicians? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, that would be fun. We'd have roads like Tetu Shani Road and Sauti Sol Road and Eric Wainaina Road and all those. But also, sometimes it does bring into question what the country values. What is it that we celebrate? Because we have athletes here or international athletes who have billboards in other countries, like in Japan or in different countries in Europe. And yet we don't have any honors for them here at home. I mean, a prophet is without honor in his own home. So what exactly do we value? And it seems politics is what we seem to hold in certain esteem, even though we may not see the connection with our actual lives. Because you look at a street named after a politician whose views you may not support, then what happens? How do you feel about that? You might be driving on that road and decide, I don't like this politician. So you park by the side of the road and block the street because, you just don't like it.
Okay, that would be very interesting to see happen. But Onyeka, you call yourself a namist. How would you go about naming roads? If it was up to you, what ordinances, as Yafesi said, would you put in place?
I think the reason why many of our roads and institutions are named after politicians is because of our warped idea of what a hero is. Just look at the list of people who get awarded on Mashujaa Day, or people that we consider shujas. Practically all are in politics. When we know well that, in fact, they're villains. Most of the politicians are villains. The guys that would be deserving of such honors are in sports, entertainment, and all these other stuff, education, science, and all that other stuff. So I think we need to refine our ways first by defining what a hero is, who a real hero is, and then proceed from there. Because even if we defined exactly the systems and procedures by which we would be naming streets, if we have the wrong names, we'll still end up not naming them according to the people that deserve of such honor.
Okay, so let's go back to how we name ourselves, right? Now, a name is a declaration of one's identity. Here in Africa, a name will more or less tell you where you're from, your culture, or your religion. Yet those who choose to go purely by their African names have to constantly battle with misconceptions that come with having 2 or more African names. Take a look.
My name is Ngila Musau Wambua. It means, well, Ngila means warrior. I'm not joking, warrior. Musau means like person, Wambua means born in the rain.
My name is Gakenya Gadura. It means, Gakenya means someone who makes people happy. The people who call me Kenya, actually, there are people who, of course, I have so many nicknames from everywhere. I work in Tanzania, and most people, they call me Dada Gake because they cannot dare try and finish my name.
Sometime I was in university and they were reading out names of people who, you know how you get your papers, your test results, and I don't know, I didn't hear my name, and the lecturer's like, who is she? Where is she? And I stood up and like, oh, sorry.
Yeah. Most people still just think that, oh, I'm not Christian because of the fact that I only have 2 African names.
Are you Christian?
I am a Christian. I am a Christian.
People go tribal. So in the sense that they would see Gila Musa Wambua.
That is so true.
And they switch to vernacular language, and all of a sudden it's an ethnic thing. And the saddest part is I don't speak the language. So they feel like, hey, such a traitor. Yeah, other than that.
That actually happens to me because everyone will ask you, like even people from other countries,
True.
for some reason they're able to know like your name is from a particular tribe, and then they're like, are you from?
Are you from?
Are you voting for?
Are you voting?
Are you? And that sometimes is not that very interesting. Yeah. I love that it's so African and that it makes people ask me questions, and then I love the meaning, of course.
It's a conversation starter, basically. Gila, where's that from?
Yeah.
Where are you from? It's identity. I think there's a lot in a name, and we should embrace our identity as Africans, and we should start with our names.
People are proud of their heritage, but when you come back to probably Africa, Kenya, we're so proud of being or speaking English and having our English names. Whereas when you go out, most people, are proud of their Spanish, their Italian, and their Dutch names. Yeah. So that's something that I honestly think that we should definitely be proud of our names.
All right, so guys, let's kick off by you telling me what your name means. So Yafesi, what is your name? Your names, both of them, what do they mean?
So my name, of course, is Yafesi Musoke. Now, the one I'm sure of is Musoke, which is rainbow, but also it could be like the god of the river, something like along those lines. As for Yafesi was actually, in fact, Yafesi Musoke was my grandfather's name. And he made a phone call because I was born in India, and he said, you're not naming that child anything except, my name. So Yafesi Musoke is who I am. It's coming down from at least 2 generations before me.
Amazing. What about you, Onyekwa?
My name is Onyekwa Onyakundi, but initially I was Onyinkwa Nyakundi. The O that comes before Nyakundi denotes the parentage. Onyakundi means in my community, when it is Onyinkwa Onyakundi, it means Onyinkwa, son of Nyakundi.
And which
that in itself is a story.
Which community is
that? That's among the Bagusi, Amakisi, among the Bagusi. So whenever I meet up with people and mention that I'm Onyinkwa Onyakundi, among the Kisi, that registers straight that this is Onyinkwa, son of Nyakundi. But among the others, they find it very intriguing that there is a name that sounds very close to Nyakundi, but in reality is not Nyakundi. So I need to explain further that this comes down to this. So which brings us to the point that names are not just names. They for the sake of it, they tell a story. They tell your history, your background, your parentage, lineage, and all that other stuff.
Yafesi, is it really fair to even criticize people based on names? Because it's not like we choose what names we have.
It's not fair to criticize based on that. But there are some people who decide to change their names when they grow up because they either don't like the names they were given or they associate them with certain things. The number of times they say, oh, my name is Yafesi. Then they're like, your other name, oh, Musoke. Your other name. What they're really asking is, what is the name that I can identify with? Not the one that you identify with, but the one that I am relaxed around or I'm comfortable with. And instead of saying Musoke, many times they just say Musioki, Musioka, Musiki, whatever they are comfortable with. And so that's sometimes a form of judgment that we place on others by changing their names because we're not going, no, I don't want to pronounce that. Give me something that I am comfortable with or that I I am fine with through my cultural eyes.
Right. That's a very valid point. And, we're going to take a short break for now. But when we come back, we delve into marriage and identity. Would you pick up your husband's name after marriage? Would you feel threatened if your wife doesn't pick up your name after marriage? Don't go too far. We'll be chatting more about this after the break. Welcome back to Kenya Connects from the BBC and KTN News, connecting Kenya to the world and the world to Kenya. Now, in many African cultures, once a woman is married, she's expected to take on her husband's surname. In instances where the woman does not, it's easily taken as a sign of rejection, insubordination, or dishonor. So again, what's in a name? Let's now focus on marriage and identity. 3 women share their experiences. Take a look.
My name is Lorato Rose Mutswene. My first name, Lorato, means love.
My name is Jean Wanja Mwongela. For a long time, I was just Wanja. I got Jean myself. It means the grace or the mercy of God. Wanja means the gift of God. And Mwongela, which is my husband's name, means abundance, one who adds.
My name is Dineo Ponso Nduna. Dineo means gifts, Ponso means vision, Nduna means chief. So Nduna is my dad's name.
I took on my husband's surname when I got married. My husband shares a similar name with me. His name is Lerato, which also means love. I felt that there was going to be confusion with our names. So I tried to say, let me keep my surname so that there's a Lorato Mukitime and there's a Lerato Mutswene, so that there's no confusion when letters come in the post and stuff like that. So I even joked with my husband and I said to him, for example, if you get a letter from your girlfriend and then I open it by mistake, I'm sure you don't want that happening. But he still kind of looked at me and like, nah, you know, I've paid dowry, which we call lobola. I've paid dowry and basically my family expects you to take on my surname. And that's how it came about.
I am not married. And if I'm given a choice, I would want to keep my father's name. Most probably I'm going to be one of those women that are just dramatic and keep my father's name and hyphen my husband's name. Just so that I can include him in the whole space and show that I honor him, you know.
I've been questioned because I've never changed my documentation. My ID still reads Jean Wanja Mashimba.
I did the paperwork and that was an administration nightmare because you have to go and change bank accounts, all your documentation at work, your ID, so all of that, your driver's license, and he gets married and there's nothing that he has to go through.
When you get into a relationship and you have not realized or identified who you are, then it means you don't know what you can offer.
For me, I think I would definitely hyphenate, because I really like my dad's surname or our surname. And, there's also the issue of when you work in media, personal brand, blah, blah, blah. So I think I would definitely be Sharon Mashira dash and then hyphenate. I was going to say someone's name, but we won't be doing that. But, just, firstly, on the same topic, what about when it comes to men taking on women's names? Like, would you take your wife's surname?
It's such a dicey area, because also that entails the changing of documentation on my side as well. But it's not something that's completely out of the question, especially when you have, in some cases, a name, or let's say your wife has a surname that opens doors because of the reality of survival and ambition and achievement. So sometimes your name will actually close doors for her if you insist on her having your name. But her name, if you use it, like if you mention it in certain spaces, doors open, opportunities open and everything, in which case, yeah, that's actually something that is worth considering. Or if not, you just at least mention that, hey, by the way, I'm married to so-and-so. Recognize.
What do you think about that, Onyinko?
Well, for me, okay, probably because of the community I come from, it would be an abomination.
Abomination.
Indeed.
It's a big word.
I understand that in certain communities, like among the Kikuyu, there are situations where a man takes up the name of the mother. But in my community, or in my upbringing, the question of a man having a lady's name is really out of question.
Even if she's a Nobel Peace Prize winner. So we wanted to actually find out from other people across the continent, and from the ladies we asked, would you pick your husband's name even if you're an established brand already? And to the gentlemen we asked, would you feel salty about your wife not adding your name to hers? We sampled some views from people across the continent. Take a listen.
I don't think I would be. Personally, don't think that it's a requirement. I think that everyone should be able to choose the name they want to choose. I see the value, though, of the name because it has power in that it brings in generational voices, it recognizes parents, it recognizes heritage, it recognizes culture, and it also recognizes language, which is a hugely important thing in this life. And being African, I feel like there is value in that name. But as far as I'm concerned, would I feel threatened if you didn't pick up my name? Not necessarily. I have seen a lot of my friends have hyphenated names, and it's perfectly fine.
Frankly speaking, I wouldn't change my name to accommodate my husband's name. Why? Because I love my dad's name on it. And again, I was his daughter before I was my husband's wife. So I just like, having my dad's name on it. And because he passed on when I was really young, I always feel like, doing away with his name would be like, doing away with his legacy sort of, because I was his daughter, before I became my husband's wife. So I wouldn't do that. But of course, I don't mind being called Mrs. So-and-so.
And slightly away from naming conventions, here's what you need to know from across the world in just 60 seconds. First off, a warning. This first story may be a little scary. A man in Austria was bitten by a python in his toilet. 65-year-old Walter A. Hart says he was using his toilet as usual and only noticed the snake after it nipped him. The 5 feet or 1.6 meter python had apparently escaped from his neighbor's home. And over in Sydney, Australia, a brewery is using algae to fight climate change. They say fermenting beer produces carbon dioxide, which is usually released into the atmosphere. So to combat this, the craft brewery has partnered with climate change scientists and developed a way to use microalgae to capture that carbon dioxide and turn it into oxygen. The breweries estimate that algae releases as much oxygen as 2 hectares of bushland. And finally, Tandiwe Murio wants her models to both blend in and stand out at the same time. The images in her camo, shot for Camouflage series, create an optical illusion where the person in the photograph almost disappears, yet it's impossible to ignore. The camo series is on show at Y93 Gallery in Paris until this month, but we give you a glimpse of her work. So we've finally come to my favorite part of the show where I get to ask you what you connected with the most in the whole program, okay? So let's kick off with you, Yafesi. What did you connect with the most?
Well, first of all, just the photographer you just mentioned, Tandiwe Murio, that name, the combination, it's South African and Kenyan, and yet I know her personally. She's not South African. Ha! So anyway, the thing I connected with the most is how it seems we're getting into a time where men are not as stuck on having, you take my name, this is what my name means, it has come down from 7 generations and you cannot change it, you will have nothing to do with erasing me from a family tree. Yeah, we seem to be a bit more liberal and more thoughtful about our names and even the ambitions that we have around those names. This is how I want to be identified. This is how I want people to refer to me. So yeah.
Amazing. Wanyinkwa?
The true value and power of names is much more than is apparent on the surface of it. Times are changing, and it's not a must, or it's not cast in stone that your kid must have a particular name from a particular community. Yeah, and that's really a good thing.
All right, well, guys, that's all we had for you today on Kenya Connect. From the BBC and KTN News, I've been your host, Sharon Mashira. And until next time, it's goodbye for now.